Welcome back, everybody. These are the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer during the webinar. So we've all come together again and we're going to do that now. Kathy, I'm going to start with you. One of the questions that have come through is, what does the research evidence say on the gendered aspects of practitioner roles? For example, do female practitioners need support when working with fathers who use violence? Does gender make a difference when engaging fathers?
Look, I think this is an excellent and really important question, so that we know that we've got a female-dominated workforce overall in this space. And so it does, lend us to say, what are we doing in this area to make sure that we're supporting our female workers, but also our male workers? Because some of the evidence around violence towards workers show that actually men are much more likely to experience violence than women, at least physical violence, because, the sort of the male fronts up to the other male in more ways than they do with female workers. But on the other hand, the disrespect towards female workers when you're working with fathers who use violence can be quite palpable, because it isn't as though they start necessarily from a point of respect towards women. It's about not only being aware of what your role is when you go into a home or someone visits you in your office, but what's your gender and how will that be being used to facilitate or be defensive?
Yes, thank you. And I will just turn to Emma and Jackie for their perspectives on this question from the service that you've been engaged with for many years. Is it something that you'd like to comment on?
Certainly, we have some amazing DV specialists who are male, and I think they're so good is because they understand their male privilege. So when they're working with survivors, just even the way they walk, the way they hold their body, the way they talk, they're so respectful and understanding that it's gender violence. So them as a male is is something that they need to consider around that. So I think, it does depend on the worker. And certainly I've seen some workers that do not understand their male privilege. So I think, like Kathy's saying, you need to think about it and you need to be respectful of that. But you also, as a female worker, you also need to understand that you're working with men who are perpetrators who have misogynistic views of women. And so you need to think that through as well. When we're working with fathers who perpetrate violence and abuse, is that we stick with goals. So when they want to take us around, the rabbit holes, we're very focused on what we're there to speak to them about.
Yeah, and that was borne out in the role plays. Jackie, from your perspective, have you found gender is, well, how does gender play out in your service provision?
Definitely, gender is a massive issue, and with regards to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, gender is massive because you got the intersectionalities of Safe and Together that they do, but it goes on about race, but people don't understand that sex is an issue as well. So an Aboriginal woman is more oppressed than an Aboriginal male. And when you've got both parents that are Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, and if it's a non-Indigenous worker, they find it very hard because they're thinking of the oppression of everyone. When there's not just the Aboriginality side, there's also the male and female component. So, and it's all about understanding your privilege as well. Even me as a female worker, just because I'm a female worker doesn't mean that I'm to forget about my privilege as well.
Great, thank you. And Kathy, another question that that's come up for you. What evidence do we have that these practice models, for example, Safe and Together, are effective, A, when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, and B, for reducing all forms of violence and abuse, not just physical violence?
I think that the issue is looking at who's being impacted and how, and that's very difficult data to get. So what we can see, though, is in terms of building the evidence base, that you're getting practitioners who are capacity built and are building capacity to work more ethically and more effectively where you've got issues of gender-based violence. So that I think that the evidence base is more in relation to the work we're doing on capacity building practitioners and the practice change that occurs, rather than necessarily looking at the evidence around how is this impacting on the clients that they work with. In terms of reducing all forms of violence, not just physical violence, what women tell us generally is that, and one of the criticisms of men's behaviour change programs and caring dads programs is that the physical violence may be able to stop, but then it translates into other forms of emotional abuse and control. Whether men are attending intervention programs or being seen or whatever, it does look like there's a bit of a trend which says these guys are getting smarter, and that in fact we're seeing much more coercive control without necessarily the physical violence. And women, when they wanted to see, you know, when they were asked what changes do you want to see from a men's behaviour change program, they said we want more space for action. That was their top thing, not stop the physical violence.
And I think that issue around coercive control and unpacking that is a critical one. Thank you. Jackie, I just would like to touch base with you around that question. What evidence do we have that the Safe and Together model is effective when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families? What have you found has been really effective?
Well, Kathy is right in regards to the how we gather the stats for that. The only evidence that I can see, and this is coming from being a worker on the ground, is how many Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders sort of Indigenous organisations are allowing me to come in and speak about Safe and Together now, and their understanding and me saying how and showing how Safe and Together fits into the way that Aboriginal being and our belonging and stuff like that. So we're seeing more and more Indigenous organisations being interested in the Safe and Together. More people are being trained, and as for the clients on the ground, I think that we're getting more engagement from families. You know, my other role is a cultural practice advisor, so I'm involved in all aspects of child safety. We're getting more of that, so that's showing, and other officers are ringing in and wanting advice. So I can see it's working slowly.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing in? It just seems to me that it's very easy to translate the model, but it's got to come from Aboriginal organisations and workers. But, you know, it's seeing all members of the family. So you're not dividing the family up, but seeing all members of the family, recognising that men have a role in the life of the family is really important. Looking at the importance of children and looking at how you support the mother-child relationship. These are all integral to how you have and think about more holistic practice.
Great, thank you. Emma and Jackie, these are practice questions that we think would be best placed with you. So, is there a risk that fathers will become more abusive or violent towards women and children if a professional engages them? If so, how do you manage that risk and plan for safety?
Obviously, there is risk with professionals engaging fathers, and especially without the lead of the mother. I think a lot of service centres, once mum says, hey, don't engage him, we're not asking enough questions on why not to, and digging deeper. Because if we can give, as a workers, give them sort of a range of topics or issues that we can talk to dad about, then and her choosing sort of what we can and can't talk about, instead of just, she said no, it's too unsafe, and then we don't touch him. We could then still listen to her and give her options. Like, we could probably speak to him about, you know, how he favours one child over the other. Maybe it's about, could he give more money to her, you know, to help assist with the children. So we need to know from her sort of what will make not only safer but better. Let her lead that. She's the one who knows him the best, so she will know what topics to talk to him about and what's a no-go.
Yeah.
And yeah. And Steve, did you have any comment that you'd like to make around that question, and in particular managing risk and planning for safety?
So there's probably two things at that point that we could get wrong, and then I'll tell you what I think we could get right. First thing we could do is we could go, well, you know, sorry, I'm going to see him anyway. You know, I know that's hard for you, but I'm going to go and see him because I kind of know that we should see him to hold him accountable. So that's the first way we could go wrong, which would be, actually, if we said that, she'd be terrified. We'd probably lose her trust. We'd be failing to kind of live up to our own principles of supporting her in her safety. So that's the first way we could go wrong. Second way we could go wrong is when she says don't see him, we could go, oh, okay, then we won't see him, right? Yeah, fine, because we're going to listen to you, and your safety is the most important thing. The second one is really the issue to focus on, where we say too easily, we follow her advice not to see him. And that, as a context, you'd have to think, why would she be saying that? Why would she be saying don't see him? And actually, our experience would tell us, and the theory would tell us, is that's because she doesn't trust us to see him. She's had experiences before where professionals actually go and see him, and she thinks we're gonna, first of all, we're gonna tell him where she lives when she doesn't want him to know that. She thinks we're gonna tell him all the negative things that she has told us about him. So she's told us about all this violence, and she assumes we're going to go and see him, and we're going to go, oh, look, your partner's told me that you're very violent to her, but she's making an assumption based on experience that we're quite useless and we're going to do it really badly. So what is the right thing to do? The right thing to do is actually say to her, you know, I respect absolutely that your safety is a priority, and if you don't want me to see him, you know, it's really useful for you to talk me through what is it you think that could go wrong. And that's her opportunity to say, well, I don't want you to mention where I'm living, and my opportunity to say, your safety is my priority. I will not be telling him anything about you unless you've agreed it. In fact, before I go and see him, I'm going to kind of more or less script with you everything that I'm going to talk to him about. Whatever you consider to be a safe way to talk to him, and a way that you think will benefit you, that's the way I'm going to talk to him. And after I've talked to him, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to check in with you in terms of how that went, and I'm going to take some more advice from you. But just as importantly, things I hear from him that are relevant to your safety, I'm going to talk to you about, and I'm going to support you in how you deal with that. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that when she says don't see him, seeing him is a critical part of addressing his behaviour. And the only way I would not see him would be if actually her answers to some of that discussion were so obviously dangerous. That might be the situation where I might say, right, absolutely, we're not going to see him. So yeah, so hopefully, again, apologise for the long answer, but hopefully that covers that particular situation.
Okay, the next question around practice lines. What strategies can be used to engage fathers in the first place, particularly if they don't want to accept responsibility or have been referred through an intervention order? What are the main things that practitioners should and shouldn't do? And we will, Emma, I'll start with you.
You know, I think that for us, working with fathers who use abuse, it's motivating around being a father and about their children. And that's how, you know, obviously we build rapport, we talk about their fathering values, we talk about their own self-determination, what they can do for their kids. So, you know, we know that fathers want to be good fathers. They not necessarily want to be good partners, but that's certainly where we focus our conversations around their children. And what we find is that there's no father that I've worked with that wants their kids to be scared of him. You know, so and there's no father I've worked with that cannot name a fathering value. So I think, you know, building rapport and then talking to fathers about their fathering is you know, what we need to work on. I think, you know, there's this certainly there's this you know, belief that if fathers are, you know, are ordered to be part of a, you know, a program, or, you know, that it's child safety, so they have to be involved, that, you know, it's not voluntary, they're less likely to be motivated to change. Or I have to say, we haven't found that, because it might start that they're coming into child safety, and yes, at the start it might be difficult, but we've certainly had fathers by the end of it that actually wanted to change and wanted to do better for their kids. So it might not be, you know, the reason them coming in the door might be different for each father, but the same questioning is happening with each dad.
Jackie, did you have anything from your perspective that you wanted to talk about in terms of strategies that that are used to engage fathers if they don't want to accept responsibility?
Sometimes just that normal language is not what our men understand, so probably look about language. And like Emma said, it's all about engaging them as fathers. So once you do that, you get very little, you know, very small percentage that won't engage.
Yeah,
It's such a critical component of the model. And the next question we have: how should practitioners, including counsellors, DFB workers, approach the relationship between parents? Is it appropriate to encourage either separation or reunion? And if so, when? And I thought you, Emma or Jackie, you might have a comment.
Well, you know, when we're working, we're taking the lead of the mother. So what her hopes and intentions and what she wants for us to do, we're really fulfilling that. So, you know, we're not focused on the relationship, we're focused on his pattern of coercive control and his behaviours that are harming the kids, impacting her parenting, impacting the family functioning. So really we're focused there. We're not actually focused on the relationship, and we're taking the lead of her with mum, what we're talking to him about and how we're going to make their lives better.
So do you bring up separation or reunion, or is that something that you respond to? If it, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, no, we wouldn't bring that up. That's for us, because that's not where our focus lies. It lies on his behaviour.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our question session, unless there are any comments that the panelists would like to make. I think we'll end it there. Thank you all so much for your time and coming back together to answer the questions. That today we've captured the broad themes of the questions that were asked. There were many. So I just wanted to say thank you to the panelists in Melbourne and in Queensland. And thank you to ACE for facilitating the session. Invisible Practices, working with fathers who use violence, the practice guide, the research report, and the research to policy and practice paper are all available on the ANRO's website, and they are also available on the CFCA website. The Safe and Together Institute website has so many useful resources, and I'd really like to point everybody in that direction as well. There's additional information and training resources that can be openly sourced. So practitioners and researchers, policymakers alike, it's an invaluable website. Well, thank you, everybody. Go well.
Thank you.
And we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.